Hello, everyone. This is Ajay Nair. I'm an associate professor and vegetable extension specialist in the Department of Horticulture at Iowa State University. And today I'm going to talk about vegetables with you. I hope it brings in a lot of excitement and enthusiasm with the growing season and the creative and the more fun things you can do growing different types of vegetables. So let's dive directly into the topic. So, when thinking about starting a vegetable planting, it could be a community garden, it could be your backyard, or maybe a little bigger than that. We start to think about the process. Okay, where do we start? So the first thing we have to think about is what are we going to use to start our vegetable plot or the planting? And the question is, do you use seeds or do you prefer transplants? Now, this question is relatively easy to answer depending on the type of vegetables you plan to grow. For example, let's say you decide to grow carrots. It's a very straightforward choice. Carrots usually are direct seeded, so you don't have to worry that much. Let's say leaf lettuce. It's all direct seeded. Onions sometimes are direct seeded too. So depending on the crop, you make a choice. And on the other hand, if you think of crops such as tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, in that case, you would be using transplants because research has shown that the advantages of growing these vegetables with transplants out yields and outperforms when you use seeds because it takes more time to grow a tomato from the seed to the final product when you do it outside. So, what are some of the major differences or things you should consider when you are deciding whether you are seeding direct or you're using transplant? So, if you are planning to use seeds, let's say carrots in this case, the first thing you have to do or keep in mind that this is directly going into the ground, and so the soil conditions should be perfect so that the seeds do not have to go through harsh conditions to germinate and pop out of the ground. So you need to have a fine soil or seed bed. There should be no clods out there. The plot should be relatively weed free because you don't want to start your seeding in a place where there are already weeds because you'll be fighting them throughout the season. So making sure that the soil conditions are perfect in terms of tilth and fine so that the seeds are quick and easy to germinate and there is a good seed to soil contact. Some of the disadvantages of direct seeding is, it takes longer time for the plants to grow. For carrots and all, there's no choice. You usually would direct seed, given the size of the seed too. But it takes time if you're seeding tomatoes directly into the soil. Let's say in May, it will take about 6 weeks or 8 weeks for them to just be the small size of a transplant and then additional 3 months or so to grow and produce. So you don't have enough time given we are in Iowa. We are in the northern tier of the country. When you direct seed in the soil, you have to be careful in terms of the conditions of the soil. There should be no soil-borne diseases, or the plot should not have had disease in the past, because you don't want to start seeding in a place where there was a disease last year or previous year. So making sure the soil is clean, because oftentimes what happens is Pythium is a microorganism that causes damping off in many of the vegetable crops. And if you direct seed, there are more chances of Pythium attacking your plant because the seed is there in the soil for a long time before it germinates. And so there are some negative connotations of having the disease already there in the soil. When you're using transplants, number one, you need to know how to grow transplants, and I'll talk about that a little bit as we move on. Either in a greenhouse or a hoop house or a heated environment. Some folks can also grow transplants in their basements, which is totally fine as long as you have the proper light for those transplants to grow, proper medium and proper watering. So it's not that you cannot grow transplants in your basement and you can only do it in the greenhouse. No, that's not true. You can grow it in the basement as long as you provide the right conditions. When you move the transplants outside, so let's talk about a typical crop which we all love to grow, and that's tomato. The tomato transplant takes about from seeding about 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks to grow to a decent size. So and after that, it has reached that size, you move it outside and you plant it outside. And the plants are not very happy because they have been pampered in a greenhouse or a hoop house or in a basement, and now suddenly they are outside. And so they go through a shock which is called transplant shock. So when using transplants, our objective is to minimize the amount of shock which we give to these transplants. And one way to do that is to harden them off. So by hardening, what I mean is, let's say you grew your transplants for about 5 weeks in a basement or a hoop house or a greenhouse. You move the transplants out to a shaded area outside, not directly under the sun, not directly where you're going to plant and grow your garden, but somewhere in a shaded area in a lath house by the side of a building, so that they're still exposed to some of the elements. So, for example, wind, rainfall, some heat, fluctuation in temperature, the nighttime and the daytime, and you leave them there for about 4 to 5 days. Excuse me. So the advantage of that is that the plants are now kind of acclimatized to the outside. So instead of directly going to the ground from your basement or the hoop house, they kind of acclimatize for 4 to 7 days. And now when you plant them, they will have minimal transplant shock. So that's one way to avoid the transplant shock. Crops that are grown from transplants are faster to harvest, which means they grow faster. And there could be some issues if you do not move your plants outside those cell trays in which you are growing your transplants or the soil blocks to outside conditions, because otherwise the roots become soil bound, or they're known as root bound, where the roots just encircle that medium in that tray, and that limits their growth or that hurts their growth. So you don't want to keep the transplants in the trays for an extended amount of time. In this case, you are seeing a picture here. These are my cucumber transplants, and you can see they are in a greenhouse in a soilless medium. Everything is germinated, so looks nice as in the picture, and it was beautiful. And so these are some of the advantages of why grow transplants, why grow vegetables from transplants. Number one, you have uniform seed germination. So if you seed directly outside in the field or the soil outside, the seed is subjected to crusting in the soil, diseases, insects that come, seed eating, insects that can come and chew on your seed, and so they are exposed to a lot of danger out there. So when you grow transplants in a flat or a soil block, they are protected and they germinate very uniformly. In the field, sometimes you seed and there's water standing where you seeded, those seeds would not germinate, or maybe you will germinate very slowly. But in a greenhouse or a hoop house, that's not the condition. So we have uniform seed germination. We eliminate variability caused by direct seeding. Again, that variability is mostly because of weather conditions. You get an early start. In Iowa or the Midwest, typically we plant tomatoes or peppers after the danger of the frost is over in the spring. So that typically is about 10th or 15th of May. It might vary depending on where you are in Iowa, but by 10th or 15th of May. So you can start your transplants 1st of April. Seed 1st of April in the hoop house or wherever convenient, and then you grow your transplants, and by mid-May they are ready to plant. So you gain that. If you were direct seeding, you will be direct seeding in May, which you would have lost 6 weeks by that time. It extends the growing season, again, because you can start early, and definitely crop grown from transplants yield more, and they're more productive, and they yield better and high quality crop. So some of the factors to consider if you're planning to start your garden using transplants is, number one, seed source. I always tell everyone, a good seed never costs, it always pays. So even if the seeds are a little expensive, that's okay. They are good quality, they're high quality, they're uniform. As long as you're buying from a trusted resource, there are many trusted sources you can buy seeds from nowadays, but make sure you get it from a good source, not just some, nothing wrong with saving your seeds either, but for hybrids and all, you definitely have to buy from trusted sources. You need to think about trays and flats, cell size. Do you want to grow it in a 72 cell size flat or 98 or 128? So you need to think of that. Typically For most of the vegetables, anywhere from 72 cell to 98 is okay. I prefer 72. It's a happy medium. You have enough medium in there. You have enough space for the transplants to grow. So that works good. Now, the growing medium, what are you growing in? It should be soilless medium. You get the peat-based medium nowadays, Faffords, Metromix. There's so many companies, ProMix, many organic ones too. These are soilless medium, peat-based, perlite, vermiculite, all mixed together. Some starter fertilizer in there as well. They provide a perfect medium for the seeds to germinate and establish. Nutrition, if you're growing transplants, you need to manage them for those 5-6 weeks. You need to provide enough nutrients. If you're organic, you can use fish emulsions. If you are not organic, you can use regular fertilizer 10-10-10, 20-20-20 and provide the nutrition. But we need to make sure that we provide enough nutrition to these plants. It doesn't mean that these plants are small, so they need less. We need to provide the appropriate amount. Light, as I indicated earlier, proper temperature, moisture, which is irrigation, and finally the hardening of process, which I mentioned earlier. So these are the factors to consider to grow your own transplants. Of course, you can buy transplants from your garden store, but sometimes if it's that particular variety of tomato or pepper which you want to grow, an heirloom type which you cannot buy outside, transplants are the only way, and then you can follow these steps or factors to consider. Now, in terms of the ease of growing transplants, I just kind of put them in these three categories to get a relative idea in how they establish and grow, and ease of growing your transplants. Broccoli, Brussels sprout, cabbage, lettuce, tomato, very easy to grow those transplants. Medium difficulty, I put, for example, onions in this, or eggplant in this, because it takes a longer time. Pepper, a longer time. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks for those transplants to grow. Celery might take about 8 to 10 weeks. So for those 10 weeks, you need to have the proper space, the temperature, the light, environment. That's why I put them in the medium category. So it's not, although I would say it's not that difficult to grow these, for example, eggplant, onion, pepper too, as long as you take the proper precautions. The difficult to grow transplants, and the reason I put them in this category, and you will see most of them are cucurbits. Cucurbits are the crops that fall in the cucurbitaceae family. Melons, cucumber, squash. Excuse me. The reason I put them in that category is because one thing is, these plants, if they're grown from transplants, they do not like their roots to be disturbed when you are transplanting them, as compared to tomato or pepper or cabbage. So you need to make sure that when you are transplanting them, so these transplants are there in the tray for a shorter amount of time, from seeding to final time, to the time when you are transplanting. It takes about, I would say, 3 weeks, mostly 3 weeks. So when you take it out at the 3rd week period and plant them in the soil, you should not be disturbing the root system too much. Tomatoes, you can literally throw them into the soil, the transplants. But with cucurbits, be very careful, be very gentle when you place them in those holes or outside when you're transplanting. Now, it's not that it will kill if you disturb the roots too much. What happens with this cucurbit plants is that if you disturb the roots too much, move them around too much during the transplanting phase, they just sit there for some time and don't grow. And so it slows their growth. And the more they sit outside, the more they are vulnerable to diseases and insects. And so that's why I still, in my personal research, and even my projects, I transplant cucurbits, but I'm very careful when I'm transplanting to provide the minimal transplant shock. So once you have grown your seeds or seedlings or transplants, or you have decided you're going direct seeded, you need to start thinking about the outside conditions where you are going to grow these plants, the soil, excuse me, the site conditions. So definitely, all the plants need full sun, because they would perform the best. Shade is not a good place to put vegetable crops, because again, you want the best out of them. You want them to utilize those photons that come from the sun, and process it, within them the metabolic pathways to photosynthesize and produce their sucrose and other compounds and carbohydrates and all, and produce a crop that yields better and is of high quality. So put them in full sun. Make sure the site is well drained, has well drained soil. There should be no water standing, because that's the worst thing you can do to a vegetable planting, is that planted in a place where water doesn't drain that well. So the roots will be devoid of oxygen. It'll affect them. It'll lead to many diseases and rotting, and it'll definitely bring down the yield and even may kill many of the vegetable transplants. So make sure they're in a well-drained soil. pH and soil conditions, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in detail. And irrigation, I'll talk about that too. They need to be properly watered, and then again, they need to be properly fertilized with the proper nutrients, so that you get a good and a decent crop. So the first thing you have to do first you find a site which is well drained and full sun, and then you definitely need to soil sample. And that should not happen just before you are getting ready to transplant, because it takes time to collect the soil sample and send it for analysis, and then add amendments like compost or fertilizers to make the levels perfect. So you need to be soil sampling in the fall, preferably, so that you can be ready early in the spring with all these things, and then plant your crop as soon as the transplants are ready. So definitely do a soil sample. I recommend doing soil sampling every year, so that we know what the levels of the macronutrients, for example, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and all are, and also some of the micronutrients. But for the micronutrients, you can test once every 4 years. But for the basic nutrients, the macro, you need to test every year. It's advisable, to test every year, so you know what's in the soil and what you need to provide. Sampling is very easy. Grab a sampling bag. You can contact your extension offices, local extension offices. They would carry these sampling bags, which you can just get from them. If you're growing vegetables, you don't have to be sampling like this gentleman is doing, go this deep. It's basically 6 inches in depth. You can use a trowel and make a V on the surface, not just take a trowel and grab a sample, make a V on the surface, 2 cuts, and then slide the trowel such a way that you get all the profile from the top to the bottom of that V. So you get a good homogeneous sample. And then you have to take a composite sample. You don't just simply take one soil sample and send. So let's say you had a plot which was 20 by 20. I would take around, I'll make a W in that plot, or maybe think of a W, imagine in that plot, and take on that W, take 4 or 5 places, collect soil samples, and then put it in a bucket, and then mix everything thoroughly together, and then collect one sample that will go out for soils for analysis. So even if it's a smaller plot, you just don't take one sample, you take multiple samples, mix them all together, and then send that composite sample for analysis. The question now is, where would you send it for analysis? Unfortunately, Iowa State University soil testing lab is kind of in the reorientation phase. They are reprogramming things, and so they're not taking any samples right now from the general public for analysis. But you can send it to other labs. For example, the University of Minnesota Soil Testing Laboratory, they do an excellent job. University of Wisconsin Soils Lab, that's also a great resource. And these are university resources, and we highly recommend them. But if you're close to a private soil testing lab, that's fine too. Midwest Laboratories, A&L Lab, Solem, Minnesota Valley Testing Lab. These are some labs that you could consider. And the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, IDALS, has listed these labs there too, that they meet the required certification to conduct soil analysis, tests and analysis. So feel free to choose any of these resources to send your soil samples. Okay, when you get the soil sample back, primarily you get many of the macronutrients, the pH, and the pH is, I would say, the single most important thing you need to know about your soil, and I'll tell you why. Organic matter, typical soil test will have organic matter, cation exchange capacity, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium, micro if you request, and you can do it every 4 years. Otherwise, just stick to the macros. But this is what a typical soil test would look like. And you can send those soil tests to us here at Iowa State, and we can interpret them and tell you, okay, maybe you need to add this, or you don't need to add anything because you have most of the things. So we are happy to help that way too. But I was talking about pH, and this is why in Iowa we are blessed with some excellent soils. So most of the time our soils have enough nutrients and the right pH so that those nutrients are available. So the pH dictates whether the nutrient, if it's present in the soil, is available to the plant. And you can see in this chart, most of the nutrients are available in that pH range of, you can see, 6 to 7. So as long as your soil pH is between 6 and 7, you have the nitrates available, potassium, phosphate, magnesium, sulfur, boron, most of the things are available. As when you start drifting away, so let's say your pH starts going up towards 7.5, 8, now you see you have an issue, especially if you're at 8, aluminum is not available, iron is not available, manganese is not available. So that's not good. And if the pH keeps going down, if you're going towards 5.5, then calcium is not available, molybdenum is not available. So you can see how things are changing when you drift out of that range. So as long as your soil pH is between 6 and 7, you're fine. And how do you know that? You know that because you did a soil test. And that's why doing soil testing is absolutely important. And I superimpose some of the vegetables on the pH chart, and you can see most of the vegetables do perfectly fine between the pH of 6 and 7. Potatoes can do okay in lower pH too, and asparagus is pretty benign in terms when the pH goes up, it's still okay. But generally, keeping the pH between 6 and 7 is ideal. Some crops are a little bit more sensitive: lettuce, onion, radish, cauliflower. But again, between 6 and 7 is what you're shooting for. Now, when it comes to planting outside, you have many choices in terms of how you want to plant. You can typically plant in a row, and you can see an image here. You have a string between two stakes. You make a small trench. You can put your seeds in there, or you can put your transplants in there. So that's a row planting. Or you can probably hill as well if you want to have plants in a bunch. In this case, let's say cucumbers. You want in a hill here. You want to plant 2 or 3 cucumbers here so that they wind out in different directions. But you can see here that there's enough spacing between these hills. So otherwise, it'll be too crowded. The plants will not get enough light. They'll compete for nutrients too much, and then the yield will go down, and the quality will be poor. So you have choices. You can use row or hill planting. You can, between the design, or you can even use like a square foot design where you have a set dimension for each crop, and you label it. It's easy to to manage. It's, for example, if you're providing specific nutrients to a certain area, it's easy to do that. Or you can do wide row where you have large expanse of one crop and another large expanse of the other one. It's up to you. I mean, it's up to your convenience, your area, what you have. But what I wanted to mention here is there should be some kind of a systematic way of planting, rather than just haphazardly putting things at different places. This also helps you to calculate the number of plants you need, how many rows, what's the spacing. It helps you mentally prepare, and also on a paper, so that you have records of where you are putting what, because you need to think about crop rotation, and I'll talk about that later. This is a more advanced way of some more intensive planting techniques, which is interplanting and succession. Let's talk about succession first. So succession planting may refer to 2 different techniques. In the first instance, for example, what you see here is that one crop is planted at different time to stagger the harvest season. It's very typical. So let's say spinach, or let's say lettuce. You might want to have several pickings. So you might plant several feet of leaf lettuce 1 week, then 2 weeks later make a second planting that will mature a couple of weeks later. So that's a very typical way of planting. Even for tomatoes or peppers, some people want to have succession planting, mostly for market gardening. But for crops that are quickly harvested on a routine basis every 2 weeks, this kind of succession planting is the best. Another use of term succession planting is when second crop is planted immediately after harvest of a different first crop. For instance, the photo on the left shows broccoli that has been harvested with a succession planting of lettuce just getting started. So that's another form of succession planting. The top image there is the interplanting. And interplanting, on the other hand, is when two crops are grown simultaneously in the same area. You can see broccoli and lettuce growing together in the same place, but together, at the same time. So you have two crops growing together at the same time. So that's termed as interplanting. In this case, the lettuce will be harvested before the broccoli needs more space to mature. So that way you made use of the time for the broccoli to mature so that you can grow something and harvest by that time. So lettuce was a good choice. Now, when to plant? This is very critical, especially for certain plants. You need to plant the cool season crops early spring when temperatures are above 45 °F. So cool season crops, the advantage to them is that they can tolerate light frost, but they don't grow well in heat or in midsummer. So crops such as spinach, lettuce, broccoli, cabbage family, collards, those are all cool season crops. So they need to be planted early. For the warm season plants, you need to wait until after the frost is over. So typically in central Iowa, it's about 10th or the 15th of May. Maybe the northern parts of Iowa, it might be a little later, maybe third week of May. But you need to make sure that the damage because of the danger of frost is completely over. Good example would be tomatoes or peppers. They need to be planted only after the frost danger is over. Now, let's say you really want to go in there and plant a little early, and there could be a chance of a frost coming later, maybe one frost. So let's say you planted on the 1st of May tomatoes, and there's a frost coming on the 10th or 12th. There's a danger. You don't know when you're planting, but what you can do is you can extend the growing season by using structures which are showcased here. For example, a cold frame, the picture to your left, that provides protection on frosty nights and warms the air around the crops on sunny days. You can on the right hand side is a picture called the wallow water. They also known as sailor caps. They provide some protection by creating tubes of water between two layers of plastic, and water retains more heat than air. So plants are protected on frosty nights, provided they don't extend beyond the protective plastic, the tape. So the cold frame and the wallow water could be something to keep handy in case you planted early and there's a danger of frost coming later. There are other forms of extending the growing season. The picture on your left shows row covers that are now very easily available in different sizes and different gauges. So if you plant a little early, you need to buy a row cover which is a heavy gauge, so it can protect again the plant from frost. And they tell you what is the temperature against which they provide protection. So the heavy gauge might provide protection up till maybe 28 °F. The lighter one may be 30 °. So let's say if you plant tomatoes early and the frost is coming, put a row cover, a heavy row cover, and that will help the plants, protect from that bite of the chill and the frost. Nowadays, there are many of these high tunnels that are showing up. These are called also known as hoop houses, which is passively heated. There's no heater or anything. It's just a frame onto which a plastic has been put, and you're growing plants in there, and it closes on all sides, so it helps protect the plants from the frost. It's the same format or the concept as row covers, but on a bigger scale. And you can see that on the right hand side, we are growing cucumbers in there on plastic mulch, and my former grad student Ray Cruzy is the one standing in the picture there. Now, mulching. Once you have planted, you need to immediately start thinking or get onto the top of mulching your crop, because you don't want the weeds to start growing and engulfing your plant. So there are many types of mulches available, and the mulches provides many benefits. It prevents weeds, it conserves moisture, it reduces erosion. You have a cleaner harvest, which means the fruits don't touch the soil, so the fruit is clean, less rotting. It increases organic matter, especially if you're adding an organic mulch. So the picture on your left hand side top, you can see a mulch up there, straw, which will eventually be tilled under after the season is over, so that adds organic matter. But the one downside of using a heavy mulch like that is it can cool the soil. So for warm season crops, it might slower their growth a little bit. But definitely adding a mulch is important. The other two pictures, you see a standard black plastic mulch at the bottom with the sweet potatoes. You see red colored mulch with tomatoes up there. It's a regular plastic mulch, which again helps to get those benefits of weed suppression, conserving moisture, and also erosion, and not allowing erosion to happen. This is a high tunnel. This is research we were conducting last year, growing tomatoes on different rootstocks and grafting. But what I wanted to highlight from this picture is look at the mulch. We used switchgrass mulch. We covered it to about 6 to 8 inch in depth, and absolutely no weeds. And this is what we want. We don't want any weeds to grow and compete with our plant. Excuse me. This is a dual weed management approach. So you can see the tomatoes are on black plastic. So that suppresses the weeds within the row, and then between the row I spread switchgrass mulch. So again, benefit of mulch, and at the end of the season, if we till it under, we add organic matter to the soil. What are some other cultural practices we need to be thinking of when we are planting outside or starting a garden? Irrigation requirements. You need to provide enough water for these plants to grow. Think about crops such as lettuce. I mean, it's about 90-95% water. So if there's no water, there's no growth. Less yield and poor quality. So most of the vegetables require 1 inch to 1.5 inches of moisture weekly throughout the growing season, either from the natural rainfall or supplemental irrigation. So most of the time nowadays, as you see, the weather is not cooperating. A lot of things are changing. The climate is so variable. Climate change is definitely happening. We have erratic rainfalls. We have rainfalls which dump a lot of water at the same time, and then there's no water for a long time. So we need to provide irrigation. So put your garden somewhere where you have access to water. In this case, the picture you see here is lettuce, which is under drip irrigation, and we'll talk about more in a minute. So how can you provide irrigation or water? Sprinkler is a very easy way. Overhead irrigation. It covers a large area quickly, but it uses a lot of water, and it requires a higher pressure, obviously higher energy requirements too. So it does fulfill some of our needs, by covering a larger area. It can also provide some frost protection. So for example, strawberries, if the frost is coming, you can run the irrigation and keep the crop moist just before the frost is coming. And that will protect the crop from frost, so that the foliage is wet and it's nicely covered. And so that's another advantage of using a sprinkler or overhead irrigation. It covers a larger area too. Now, with the drip irrigation, the benefits are low pressure. You don't need much pressure, more efficient, and much less water. The drip lines on these containers. Tomato plants, container tomato plants here, place the water right at the root zone where it is needed. You're not irrigating around the crop. For example, in the previous slide, a lot of weeds would also grow wherever the water is falling. So in this case, you can eliminate that. Drip systems operate at low water pressure, and in most cases, the drip must be set up each year. So these are, if you can, some of the materials, for example, the header here might be okay for 1 or 2 years, but the tubes and all, at the end of the season, make a call. Take a look at it. If they're okay, they're not clogged, you can use it again, but otherwise you might have to buy again. So irrigation is important. So now let's get into some of the specific crops. And I gave you a general idea of things to consider. Now we are talking about different crops you can grow. Lettuce is an excellent example. Spring season, cool season crop. The first thing to go into the ground. There are different types of lettuces: loose leaf, crisp head, butterhead, many varieties. And your manual, the Master Gardener manual, has a lot of these information, so you don't have to jot everything down. But I wrote some of the commercial varieties which growers grow in the state. For loose leaf, black-seeded Simpson, for crisp head, Ithaca, Great Lakes, and for butterhead, these are those smaller, more buttery tasting lettuces that are getting more and more common. Hermosa, Nancy, Adriana, these are some good cultivars. The crisp head or the iceberg lettuce, loose leaf, and the butterhead. Again, we don't have to just simply eat the iceberg lettuce always. We need to start diversifying our palates and try new things. And butterhead lettuce that's a great addition, a new addition to the lettuces. Of course, there are some other types, the coarse or romaine, and some stem lettuces. Romaine is also picking up many of the restaurants, many of the farmers market, CSAs. We see a lot of movement of romaine lettuce. It's a nice compact growth, and it's suitable, perfect for our growing conditions. So definitely consider some of the romaine. Stem lettuce is more of a not novelty here. Not many growers grow it. It's more common in China, and in this case, the stem lettuce, people don't eat it or grow it for the leaves, but it's primarily grown for the stem, and they chop it into small pieces back in China, and then they would stir fry it. I mean, you can do it here too, not just there, but that's what the use is. So this is a picture I took when I was in China, in Beijing, in 2013. You can see the celtus there, that long stem. You see some pak choy back there. That's also a great crop to grow. Some big radishes at the bottom. So talking about lettuce, I want to introduce you all to some newer types of lettuces and try to grow these. Batavian or the crisp head types, or they're also known as the summer crisp lettuce, a great addition. The Salanova or the green oak leaf type. I mean, look at the shape, look at the size. It's so unique, and many of the restaurants are getting into this. I think this is definitely a great addition when you talk about lettuces to be grown outside. Obviously, from transplants, it's better to grow from transplants. There are some other Salanova. This is the Easy Tron. I think that's the name of the cultivar. Again, Batavian type, very unique in terms of shape and the size. Romaine lettuces, the category of romaine, a lot of interest and a lot of movement in these types. Here you can see my grad student, Maria Belenki. She's transplanting some of the lettuces. This is on black plasters. This is for commercial production, but you can see the spacing. We are using about 10 inches between plants and about 12 inches between the rows. So two rows on a bed. You don't have to have 10 by 12. Over the years, I have seen that a 9 by 9 works perfect. So 9 inches between plants in a row and 9 inches between the rows, and that works great. More compact, less weeds, and looks better too. And so those are the same lettuces she's planting. So those were the butterhead types, not the romaine, but butterhead type. And I think this is Adriana, and this looks perfect. This was in the fall. Now, lettuces are not free from pests and diseases. So aphids, they spread viruses. That's very common. You can see how the lettuce head here is just completely collapsed. So you need to be careful and scout. More than careful, just being out there and proactive and scouting and see if there are insects, and spray for them on a timely manner. There are many products you can use which are available, from your garden store. Many pyrethroid-based products, neonicotinoid, although there are some controversies in terms of bees, but there are some commonly used, pyrethroids that you can use to manage these. Aster yellow, that's what happened when it's a mycoplasma-like disease that actually the plants just completely collapse. So keep an eye out when you plant. Some physiological issues, in this case, you can see the lettuce has this browning or they're dying back, kind of the edges of the leaves of the younger. That's the lettuce tip burn, and that's primarily caused by calcium deficiency, and that's where the providing proper nutrients to the plants is critical. So that you have the plants have enough nutrients to grow, and that's one less thing to worry about. So that's where soil testing is important and adding enough nutrients for the plants. For harvesting of lettuce, it's better to harvest early in the morning. It's better flavor because the latex leads to bitter taste later in the day. So I prefer harvesting early and cool them quickly because it's basically 95% water. So otherwise they'll start losing water. So cool them quickly, rinse them, and if you put them in the refrigerator, it's about 2 to 3 weeks of shelf life. Some of the other leafy greens, collards are a good example. I like to grow them. You plant them using transplants in rows which are about 18 to 20 feet, 24 inches apart, and within row to 18 to 24 inches, which is about 1.5 to 2 foot, and the rows could be 3 feet apart. They grow about 2 to 4 feet high. You can harvest sequentially from bottom going up when they achieve the full size, but it takes about 75-90 days. Or the whole plant can be harvested, when the plant is only 12 inches, so more crisper, more tender at that time. Champion and Flash are good cultivar. Here's a picture of collards for you. I think Champion was the name of the cultivar here, but you can see we can sequentially harvest it from the bottom. Kale is another one that is gaining popularity and because of many health promoting benefits. There are 2 types of kales when you grow, Scotch and the Siberian. The Scotch is more grayish and crimpled leaves. Siberian is more bluish green and less crimpled. And the easy way to remember this is Scotch. If you drink Scotch, you're not going to stand straight, right? You're going to drink it too much. A little bit is okay. If you drink too much, you will be like wavering. You'll be like, and that's what leads to more crimpling. So if it's more crimpled, it's the Scotch type. If it's less crimpled, it's the Siberian type. So I don't know if it's a good joke or a bad joke, but a good way to remember your kales. Plant growth spacing very similar to collards, 18 to 24 inches in the row and about 3 feet between rows. Does best when planted late summer or early fall, and again doesn't like the heat too much. 40 to 50 day crop, high in beta carotene, vitamin C and calcium. So if you have not grown kale, maybe something to consider. Here's a picture of kale for you, and again you can sequentially harvest them, bunch them, good for salads, and when I say salad, I like salad which has many different stuff in it. For example, lettuce, and you can add kale, you can add collard, you can add mizuna, tatsoi, that's a good mix, more diverse. So that was the more of the leafy greens. Now a quick info on the brassicas, and those are cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower. Those are the common ones. Brussels sprout is gaining a lot of popularity nowadays. It's being more and more commonly visible in our farmers market and CSAs. Collards, actually kale and collards also fall in that brassica family, but again a great family to consider. Because it's again for the nutrition and the fun of growing these, and so many things you can do with these things, with these crops. So for brassica, for cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, you can see spacing is very much the same, 18 inches to 30 inches between rows, and the rows are about between rows, and within the row the plants are about 8 to 12 inches apart. So and same for cabbage. Cabbage is a little bit wider than broccoli. Brussels sprout, you can see the spacing a little bit more. Between rows about 18 to 36 inches. I would say 36, which is 3 feet. And in the row about 18 inches or 24 inches apart, because the plants can grow really big. But this chart gives you a general understanding of the spacing in row and between rows for some of the cole crops. Cultivars, Gonzales is a great fresh market cultivar, super red, storage number 4, and there are many. If you go to many of these catalogs, Johnny's, high mowing, Seedway, Rupp, Seegers. So there are many options available out there. Many cultivars available. Broccoli, again, so many options. Marathon, which is a cold tolerant one. There's a new this type called D Chico, where it's a 50-day plus, a shorter one. uh, in broccoli, some of the cultivars which we are trying at the Horticulture Research Station: Green Magic, Green Gold, Asteroid, Emerald Star. Those are some good cultivars you can grow. Now, for cauliflowers, this is based on Mark Twain. Cauliflower is nothing but cabbage with a college education. So it's a little bit tougher to grow the cauliflower, because I feel what Mark Twain wanted to say, that when people go to college, they become a little bit more complicated to work with as compared to somebody else. But again, that's Mark Twain for you. But cauliflower is a great crop to grow, not very difficult. Snow crown is an excellent crop to grow 50 days. I've grown it multiple times. Romanesco, a different shape, unique size, color too, adds addition, color to the garden. So definitely consider cauliflower if you're thinking of a vegetable garden. Fertility wise, these crops are heavy feeders, and that's why you need to apply a lot of nitrogen, and anywhere from 100 to 150 pounds per acre. That's an acre basis. If you have to make sure you calculate for the size of your plot or the garden. Because too much of nitrogen can cause splitting in cabbage. So I don't know if you have a chance, if you have seen, sometimes these cabbage will crack, and the head will crack, and that's because of too much of nitrogen. And also some hollow stem issues with broccoli. When you cut the broccoli open, it has hollow stem. Brassica crops are sensitive to micronutrients, so that's why getting a micronutrient test done helps you to figure out, especially boron is the one that they are more susceptible to. So know what's in the soil. pH as usual, 6.5 to 7. 6 to 7 is okay. So you can see boron deficiency in cauliflower, browning of the head, molybdenum deficiency. Molybdenum is a micronutrient. You can see cupping of the leaves, calcium deficiency in the leaves. The younger leaves, kind of dying back, crinkling, the head is small. So that's why soil testing is important to know what to add. And there are physiological disorders. Cracking in cabbage is common, and because of too much nitrogen, could be too much water. Wider spacing or varieties can also cause cracking. Now in broccoli, this is a challenge actually. This brown head. So you see the browning of the head, where the broccoli florets turn yellow and then brown, and causes have still not been well understood. Most of the time it's heat, and that's why we want to make sure we harvest our broccoli before the peak of the heat. The summer season is here, so that we plant early, and so harvest by mid-June and not go much beyond that. But boron can also cause this issue. So again, something to know and watch out for. So that's where planting early will come handy. There are three major pests when it comes to brassica crops, and I thought I'll add this slide so that you can see those pests and learn about them by looking at the larvae and the adults. So the three major ones: the imported cabbage worm. You can see these butterflies flying around with two black spots on their back. This is the image to your right hand side here. That's the imported cabbage worm moth. And then you can see the larva, which is translucent and light green in color. And then the other one is cabbage duper, very common. I don't know how they find it, but they all the time, 100%, anytime you plant cabbage or cauliflower or broccoli, they will find that crop and they will be there. You will see those holes on the leaves. So be prepared for them. Larvae looks like this with a black head, whereas imported one was translucent. Black colored moth for cabbage looper. And sometimes you get this diamondback moth. Not very common here in Iowa, but it's a very small insect here and a very small larvae as well. So those are the three major insects, and you can easily treat them by using BT. It's Bacillus thuringiensis. It's an organic product, commonly and very easily available. You spray it 2 times with an interval of about 3 to 4 days, and that will do the trick. You don't need to use any harsh chemicals to manage these pests. So relatively easy to manage, but keep an eye, please scout, so you know when they are out there. In terms of diseases, I wanted to highlight black rot. I have been getting calls about this disease for a couple of years now. You can see on your brassica crops, on the leaves, you see this V-shaped yellow lesion or a pattern. That's typical for black rot, which is a bacterium, Xanthomonas campestris. And the best way to avoid this is to rotate, which means don't grow your brassica at the same place for year after year. You need to grow brassica year one, and then for the next 3 years, don't grow anything in the brassica family there. And then year four, you can come back with a brassica. So the crop rotation definitely helps to keep the pressure down, and it helps to completely eliminate this disease. So make sure you rotate your crops. Move on to another interesting family, that's Cucurbitaceae, and there are many cool crops in here. Cucumbers, melon, squash, pumpkin, and gourds. I mean, so many. Wonderful family to work with. There are different type of flowers in these families. There's female flower and there's a male flower, and some of them have perfect flowers too. For example, muskmelon, after some time, first it produces the perfect flower, and then male and female flowers show up. But for you some biology here, there's male and female flower, and so to transfer the pollens from the male flower to the female flower, you need insects, and that's where the pollinators come handy. So you absolutely need to have beneficial insects, honeybees, wasps, any of the other beneficial insects which are out there, bumblebees, that can transfer those pollens. So this family depends on insects a lot, depends on insects a lot for proper pollination, fruit set, and fruit development, and fruit growth. Okay, so we need to understand that there are both male and female flowers, and we need the help of the insects. Monoecious, I thought I'll put the definition is there. It's a Greek term. Mono means one, ecious means home. So monoecious plants means the plant has a separate male and female flower on the same plant or same home. That's what they meant, monoecious. But there are both male and female flowers. So in terms of pollination, we need bees. If you have some flowering plants around your garden or backyard, that helps to bring in those beneficials. Perfect, great. We need some kind of an attraction for these beneficials to move in and out. Some people even plant pollination or pollinator plants that bring in these pollinators, and there are many publications available. Iowa State has publications on that, so if you go to the extension store, you can find that. But you definitely need the help of the bees. If you don't have enough of them, then this is what will happen. If you see here, and this one, this is inadequately pollinated cucumber. So it's more C-shaped, not proper growth. This is non-marketable. It's a no-starter. It's gone. It's not. The plant put a lot of resource in growing this, but this is not marketable. Nobody will buy it or grow it or eat it. So that's why we need to promote more beneficials in our backyards. More examples. You can see cucumbers here. Marketable on the right hand side, non-marketable on the other side. You can see this one odd shaped, C-shaped, not properly formed, and that's because of poor pollination. Now in this family, I divided them into basically 3 categories or 4 categories here. There are some quick growing crops, for example, yellow squash and zucchini, 40 to 50 days. I'm sure when the month of May approaches, June approaches, there'll be so much of zucchini and yellow squash out there that you'll be just harvesting almost every day, because you don't want it to grow too big, because then it becomes non-marketable and not tasty. You need to have them tender, 6 to 8 inches, maybe 8 to 10 inches, but not more than that. But they produce a lot, and if you have a lot, you eat a lot, you share with your friends a lot, and even then, even if you have more, you can maybe make zucchini bread, right? That's a good way to use them. For our, we don't have much pickling cucumbers here in the state, but slicing cucumber, about 60 to 70 day crop. Melon and watermelon, longer duration, 70 to 90 day crop. And then you have those squashes, those winter squash, for example, the butternut squash, acorn squash, buttercup squash. Those take more time, 90 to 120 days. So that's why, again, now tying this back to transplants, if you grow your transplants, you can cut down on some of the days and plant your crop early, again, after the frost has passed. because these are long duration crop. Winter squash about 90 to 120 day. Pumpkin, the same thing. Winter squash. So I thought I'll put the slide up there. These are the hard squashes. Relatively easy to grow, one-time harvest, 1 to maybe 2-time harvest, as compared to cucumbers or squashes which you're harvesting multiple times. But you can store them. That's a great benefit of these crops in the fall. And in terms of storage, there is a difference. The acorn squash can store for about 1 to 2 months. The butternut squash for about 2 to 6 months you can store them, and the buttercup is the most, 6+ months of storage. So if you want to store more, grow buttercup squash. Now, I get this question about the ripeness of when should we harvest the muskmelon. How do we know? So basically, we go by the vine attachment. If you where the vine is attached to the fruit, and how it separates, it's called a slip. When some pulling or help is needed, referred to as half, a little bit of pull is needed, a tug is needed, it's half slip. If you don't need any of the pull, it's very easy to pull off, then it's called the full slip. So it's more mature. So if you want to ship it or something, or harvest a little early, then do it at half slip. But if you want to eat it at prime maturity, horticulture maturity, at full slip, a gentle tug, not even a little bit pull. So that'll be the full slip. If you go to the website I mentioned at the end of this presentation, extension.istate.edu/vegetable lab, that's my lab webpage. I have a short video that talks about full slip and half slip, so you can take a look at that video and exactly understand what I mean to say. Ripening can continue off the vine, but flavor or sweetness is not usually as good as wine ripened. So that's why you need to let them grow full slip to get that benefit. Watermelon ripeness, again, this is more on the hilarious side of things, or fun. The scientific way would be to look at the tendril near the vine. The tendril on the vine nearest where the fruit attaches will become brown or will die. That's a good way to understand. The spot where the melon rests on the ground turns yellow. So that's how you know the watermelon is ready. And sometimes people talk about this sound. And they say that if you knock on the melon, a hallow or a punk sound as opposed to a ping or a pank sound when thumbed with a finger. Oh boy, this is something you need to be more creative about and get into the swing of things of how to do it. It's very difficult for me to fathom this, and my punk will be your pank, maybe, I don't know. So maybe looking at the tendril and looking at the ground, the brown yellow spot is better, for melons. I didn't talk about the spacing here. So for cucumbers and all, we grow them in rows, single row, put about 18 inches between plants. If you're growing the summer squash, I'll go back. If you're growing summer squash or zucchini, 18 to 24 inches, they become bushy. Some of them are vine type, some are bushy type, but about maybe 24 inches between plants. Watermelon, more spacing, at least 2 feet, 24 inches, and more spacing between the rows. So watermelon and pumpkin and all definitely give about 8 to 10 feet between rows, because these plants will expand. For slicing, for pick melons, 7 foot between rows, and within the row again 18 to 24 inches. Okay, what about the insects and diseases in this family? So I highlighted the 3 most dangerous ones. who these insects are there waiting for you to plant your cucumber, because they are as if they're waiting on the fence post. You plant your cucumber today, next day they're watching you plant, sitting on the fence post, and they're on it soon after you leave the field, especially the striped cucumber beetle. So these are the main: striped cucumber beetle, squash vine borer, squash bug. Diseases, bacterial wilt, that comes with the cucumber beetle. So that's why managing cucumber beetle can help you manage bacterial wilt as well. Some soil-borne issues with fusarium wilt, downy mildew, anthracnose. Not very common, but you need to be aware. So these are most notorious pests of the cucurbits, especially for cucumber, squash, muskmelon. They don't bother the watermelon that much. But you can see there are 2 types, striped and spotted. The striped one does overwinter here in Iowa. and the spotted one comes from the south. But the damages in terms of, the leaves are chewed on, the fruit is, gnawed on, and there's discoloration, and the fruit is bad. And more than that, these beetles spread the bacterial wilt, which is called by bacteria Erwinia trachyphylla. And you can see what happens is that during the middle of the day, you look at this plant, half of it is okay, but the other half, the leaves have just drooped down. Because what has happened is the bacteria has gummed up the xylem, or where the water flows in the plant, and the plant has collapsed. And so it's not going to come back, it's completely gone. So if you see a plant with the symptom in which you see some leaves are okay and some leaves are drooping, this is bacterial wilt. You need to immediately pull this plant out and throw it away. Because otherwise what will happen is that some beetles will come and sit on this, collect the bacterium, and move on to the next plant. So you will spread the bacterium that way. So rogue the plants, remove them as soon as possible. Squash vine borer is more of a pest of the squashes. It's like a clear wing moth. It overwinters here as pupa. They appear in mid-June, so keep an eye out for them. For cucumber beetles, probably beginning of June. That's when they start showing up. For squash vine borer, they lay the eggs near the base of the plant, and then the eggs hatch. And as soon as they hatch, the larva tunnels into the stem. So you need to manage the pest as soon as the egg you see an egg, or you see eggs laid, because otherwise, once the larva gets inside the stem, it's very difficult to use any chemicals because they're protected or shielded inside the stem. Squash bug, pictures here. If you flip the leaves of the squash, you can see these grayish colored bugs, sucking mouth parts. They suck the juices. This is what the eggs look like. They're in a cluster, more like orange or metallic brown colored eggs in cluster. And again, for them, it's very difficult to manage them in the nymph stage. So it's better to, as soon as you see the adults out there, start spraying or do something immediately. Otherwise, they get out of the hand very quickly. There are many labeled insecticides that are available that can help you manage the squash bug. Now, one way, if you do not want to spray anything, is to use row covers. And you don't have to use a heavy gauge, but use a lighter gauge row cover and just cover the plants so that the bugs can't get to them. Now, with the cucurbits, you have to be sure that you remove the covers when the plants are flowering, because you need to have the pollination to happen for the bees to move around and move the pollen. So until the flowers show up, as soon as you plant, you can put a row cover. And you can see in this picture on the right hand side is a lighter gauge row cover, on the left hand side is the more thicker row cover. You can buy a regular GI wires, galvanized iron wire, cut it with a bolt cutter and make those hoops, and just put this row cover on top. And that's a great resource for organic growers, sustainable growers, to manage these pests. Otherwise, you have to constantly spray pyganic, which is expensive, and every 4 or 5 days it adds to the cost. It's difficult to manage these pests: cucumber beetles, squash bugs, squash vine borer, with organic means. Next family is Solanaceae, and that's tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and potato. A great family because we grow a lot of these crops and we consume a lot of these crops here in the state. For planting, for peppers, I like to plant in double rows, and you can do a 12 by 12 arrangement, like 12 inches within the row and 12 inches between the row, so 12 by 12. If you want bigger, blockier pepper plants, then maybe make it 12, or maybe make it 18 by 12, so 18 inches within the row and 12 inches between rows, these double rows. But it's a great crop to grow, perform really well here in the state. Some nice blocky and some different colored peppers. I personally like to stake the peppers as well, because the wind otherwise topple them, and the fruit falls and they come in contact with soil and the disease and the rotting and all. So staking definitely helps. There's many cultivars for peppers. Intruder is a good one for green type. We have grown many colored ones, for example, Red Knight, Archimedes, Delario is an orange one, Flavor Burst is a yellow one. So if you're into colored bell peppers, there are many nice cultivars and varieties available that perform really well here in our state. Irrigation and fertilization, definitely steady watering. If you don't water regularly, then there are issues with the blossom dropping. And before that, I wanted to mention about tomatoes in the bottom picture here. You can see they are planted in single rows, not in double rows, and the plants you can plant about 18 inches apart. You can go to 24 inches too if you're growing an heirloom or an indeterminate type tomato, but typically it's about 18 inches between plants. And you can see I've staked it with regular stake and tomato twine. I do it about 3 or 4 times as the plant grows so that the plants don't fall, because if you don't stake them, they'll fall on the ground, the soil will come in contact with the leaf, there'll be many foliar diseases, fruits rotting. So it's better to always stake your tomatoes so that there's enough air movement and less diseases and less splashing of soil that can bring on diseases onto your plant. So irrigation is important, fertility is important, because if you don't do that properly, flower can drop, misshapen fruit, cracking, and that all leads to waste of your effort in growing the plant. You did everything to grow the plant and establish, but if you don't provide proper irrigation and fertigation, you don't get high quality produce. So tomatoes, I'm sure you all know about it, but just a brief intro here about the 2 types of tomatoes. There are determinate types and there are indeterminate types. So the determinate types are the more bushy types. They are small, compact plants. They are more concentrated fruit set, like 4 or 5 times, and then they start going down. First harvest will be small, but the second, third, fourth will be high, and the fifth and sixth will go down, and so more concentrated during those harvests. They are not pruned. You can just leave them, and we'll talk about pruning in a minute. I usually like to prune them. When I say pruning, it's removing those suckers that arise between the main stem and the leaf. So you need to prune them, otherwise it becomes too bushy and less air movement and more diseases. But for the indeterminate, if you remove the suckers maybe up till the first fruit cluster and then don't do it, that's still okay. But I still prefer to remove the suckers up till the first fruit cluster. I would stake them, although I wrote seldomly staked. That's mostly for processing tomatoes, but for fresh consumption, fresh market, I would stake them. And then for indeterminate types, these are larger plants, they continuously grow. The apical bud, the main difference between determinate and indeterminate is that the apical bud in the determinate type of tomato ends up in a fruit after some time, after the plants reach 4 or 5 feet. But in the indeterminate type, the apical bud is always vegetative. It will always produce a leaf, so the plants keeps on growing. So continual fruit production, they have to be pruned and suckered. When I say suckered, it's removing the suckers, and suckers are leaf tissue that start, leaves that come between the main stem and the leaf. And so the tomato leaf and the main stem, if you see a new growth coming between there, that's a sucker. You need to remove those suckers. Otherwise, there'll be so many suckers, the plant will be so bushy and so difficult to even harvest and to get into. And then there'll be diseases inside the plants, which will be very difficult to manage because of less aeration. It will be so bushy mess that you don't want to plant like that. You definitely stake them and definitely remove the suckers for the indeterminate types, or the heirloom type. So you can see the heirloom tomatoes here, different colors, different flavors. The one thing I love about it is the flavor. I mean, Cherokee purple, black creme, you take a bite into it, you know that you bit into a tomato. And so if you have not grown some of these heirloom types, I highly encourage you to try them. They are wonderful. I mean, the ones that we buy in the store are more bred for storage, long-term shipping. So the flavor aspect is kind of lost. But the heirlooms one, oh, absolutely amazing. The juices just burst into your mouth, and the flavor just making me hungry. So suckering, I talked about suckers. So remove the suckers, which are the lateral branches in the axil of leaf. So if you look at this image, this is the main stem of the tomato, and between the main stem and the leaf, there's another vegetative thing, the lateral branch that's coming up. That's a sucker. This sucker has become too big. They need to be removed. Because the advantages are, if you remove suckers, it improves the yield in the limited space, because the plant is not spending a lot of time producing these vegetative growth and will put more time into reproductive growth, which is what we want, fruits. It improves air circulation and reduces risk of diseases. The disadvantages are, yes, it's labor intensive, and it's unnecessary for determinate type. Although I would say remove suckers till the first fruit cluster appears and then leave it. Then don't remove the sucker. But suckering definitely helps. There is a YouTube video link here, which, and if you just put removing suckers in tomatoes in YouTube, you'll find tons of video resources. Now in tomatoes, fruit quality is the key. And one thing we have to understand and acknowledge that 25 to 60% of tomato fruits are not #1 quality. They are either too small, they crack, they have defects, they have misshapen. Now, as a gardener, you have some handle on to minimize these things, and that's how. And the way you do that is properly watering, properly fertilizing, removing the suckers, scouting for insects, and making the plant grow and be happy. But do acknowledge that there will be many of the fruits and tomatoes that will be non-marketable. For example, cracking, that's because of irregular watering. If you water too much at a time and then you wait for 10-15 days and then you water again a lot, it will produce these cracks. Yellow shoulder disorder, this right hand side, this is because of two things: heat and also because of potassium deficiency. So you need to provide enough potassium right from the beginning so that the plants don't show this, because this shows up when the plants are in the fruiting phase. And when you see this, you can see uneven ripening or blotchy ripening. This is non-marketable. I mean, this is not good flavor when you bite into this yellow area of the tomato. You want nice, ripe, red tomatoes. So keeping up good handle on the fertility is important. Similarly, blossom end rot. Many of the growers report that you see this black color discoloration at the blossom end, and that's blossom end rot that caused because of two things: one, low calcium in the soil, and two, soil is too acidic, because of which the calcium is not available. So if you correct the pH, calcium is more available. You didn't have to add calcium. Calcium is already there. You just corrected the pH. So soil testing, see how important soil testing is. And also irregular watering. If you don't water in a regular fashion, calcium doesn't move into the plant. Calcium moves into the plant with water. So if you don't water regularly, there's not enough calcium moving in, and that will lead to blossom end rot. So making sure there's enough calcium in the soil and then you water properly will take care of this issue. How does blossom end rot looks like on pepper? This is what it looks like. And the blossom end, this is just the start. So at this stage, if I would have started making sure that I'm putting water regularly and making sure there's enough calcium. If not, I can use calcium nitrate as a fertilizer through my injector or my drip irrigation. I can correct that. I would have eliminated things like this one, which is more advanced stages of blossom end rot. What about the pests for tomatoes? The #1 pest is the tobacco hornworm, and you can see in this one, this nice fat guy here. He has chewed up many of the tomato leaves on the right here and grown in size, and it has a tail at the back. So that's a tobacco hornworm. It's sometimes very difficult to see this insect because it camouflages so well within the plant. So what you would see is leaves gone or stems broken. So that's why, and black colored feces of the insect out there. That's how you know that there's tobacco hornworm. Look more closely, you'll be definitely able to spot this insect, this caterpillar. How do you take care of this caterpillar? Dipel. Again, the BT formulation, Dipel, Javelin, it's another BT, this different name. Use Dipel, BT, spray it once, wait for 3-4 days, spray one more time, this caterpillar will be gone. It's an organic product and it's safe for the environment, safe for you, and it's very effective on this insect. What are some of the diseases for tomatoes? You can see septoria leaf spot. On the top, you can see on the fruit, on the leaf. We have early blight that comes. So those are the two major ones, I would say. There's sometimes bacterial spot. There's sometimes bacterial speck. And so properly identifying them. And of course, you can send your sample to the plant and insect diagnostic clinic here at Iowa State, and they do a great job in identifying and getting you the right recommendations to manage this. But most of the time, crop rotation, staking your crop well, using the right seed source, which are clean, can help you eliminate some of these diseases. Finally, I want to talk about the Aeliaceae, the onions and the garlic family, personally, because I love this family. It's something, which you, for example, garlic, you plant in the fall, and you wait for June and July, and then you harvest at that time. So it's good. I like this crop, the garlic and onion too. A great addition to any garden. So for garlic or the allium, generally they are cool season crops. They're slow growing, so that's why weed management is very critical. Shallow and root systems. So again, watering, make sure they're properly watered. Mostly biennial, which means they have vegetative phase 1 year and the reproductive phase the next year. They produce bulbs. The exception is leeks, and bulbs. Onions are a good example of that. Okay, moving on. For onions, this is for onions, and I thought I'll put this slide out there. We have to be very careful that we select the right variety of onions to grow here in Iowa, because onions are based. They grow based on their day length. So there are short day types, there are intermediate types, and there are long day types. So the short day types are the ones that need less than 12 hours of light to trigger bulbing. So these are also called southern varieties, mostly grown in Texas and Arizona. Intermediate, what, it doesn't matter whether, as long as the day length has a 12-hour cycle, 12 to 14 hours of light, they are fine. And there are long day types which need absolutely 14 hours of more day length conditions to form the bulb. And these are the northern types or the Spanish types. They're more hard and more pungent. So thinking of these types, again, short day, less than 12 hours of day length, intermediate, 12 to 14 hours, and long day, more than 12 hours. If you think of that, what is the type we should grow in Iowa? The answer is we should grow the long day type, because in the summer here we have longer conditions, longer day length conditions. So as bulbing is initiated by the day length, and day length is, so let's say when you for example, you grew a southern type. I'm going back here. You use a short day type here in Iowa. So that short day type, that condition less than 12 hours of day length, is quickly met in the growing season. So those crops will go into bulbing pretty soon without even producing a lot of foliage. And so the bulbs will be small, not a good quality. So in Iowa, you definitely need the longer day length condition. And that's the third bullet point. For onions in Iowa, you need varieties with long critical day conditions, because it takes longer time for them to meet that condition, and that's the appropriate time when they start producing the bulb, because their conditions are not met quickly. It takes time, and that gives enough time to produce a good decent sized bulb. Oppositely, if you take the long day condition long day length requirement onion to South Texas and Arizona, they will never bulb, because their long day conditions are not met. And so that's why it's very critical you get the long day types for production here in Iowa. For planting in onion, you direct seed them, April to early May. April is preferred. You can transplant them too. I have used transplants for onions. It works perfect. I grow them in 72 cell flat, and in each cell I put about 3 onions and then 3 seeds, and I take this plug which has 3 seeds in it and put them in rows 12 inch, and within the row these clumps of 3 seeds are 12 inches apart, and I put 4 rows at about 4-inch gap. Transplants would also work for onions. So I have the spacing in detail at the fourth bullet, the spacing 32 to 40 inches between beds. So we grow them in beds, and each bed will have about 4 rows of onions in double rows, 12 to 18 inches apart. That's 4 rows. So rows are 12 to 18 inches apart. In-row spacing depends on a size desired. Varies from 1 to 4 inches. If you want bigger onion, give a bigger spacing. If you want smaller onions, you can reduce the spacing there. But again, onions and garlic are a great crop to grow here. And garlic, you'll be planting in the fall. Onions in the spring. Onions during the time of harvest, you will cure them. You want them to dry the leaves, the top portions. I'm going back to the picture again here. You can see these onions are ready to be harvested. The top is yellow and brown and dried off, not green, and I leave them in the field for about a week so that they can just condition themselves. The outer skin becomes more papery, and so it protects the crop or the onion from diseases when it's in storage. So curing involves drying of the outer scales, 2 to 3 weeks. You can force it to if you are commercial, but in the homeowner situation, in the garden situation, I would just leave them for about a week in the garden and then harvest. Okay, so I don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to move over to a different topic which applies to most of the vegetables, and that's crop rotation. And the reason it's very important is that smaller acreages, smaller gardens, community gardens, you don't have much space to move around, and so you might be growing the same thing at the same place again and again, and that's not desirable. Yeah, and if you look at this chart, which shows the common vegetable diseases and their rotation requirements, you can see crops such as diseases, for example, alternaria leaf spot, club root in cole crops, or let's say angular leaf spot in cucumber beds. I mean, they take a lot of time, especially angular leaf spot, many years of rotation. Club root, 6 to 10 years, and rotation means you don't plant that crop there after that many years. But typically, again, I don't want to scare you, but typically for most of the vegetables, as long as you follow a 3-year crop rotation. So let's say plot A. Within a big plot, you have a section A. And the section A, you grew tomato. Next year, don't grow any crop that is in the solanaceous family. Not just tomato, in the solanaceous family. So if you grew tomato here in plot A in year 1, next year, no tomato, no pepper, no potato. So year 2, nothing, year 3, nothing, year 4, nothing, and year 5, you can come back with any of those solanaceous crops. So at least 3 to 4 year, 2 to 3 year rotation is what we recommend to keep most of these diseases out. You can see, I mean, it takes many years to rotate out of those diseases if they are there in the soil. So 3 to 4 years what's suggested. If you can't do 3 to 4, at least 2 to 3. I would say 3 is a good number. 3 years is a good number. So how do you do that? I mentioned that, but this is a very easy way I thought of. Okay, how would somebody do keep track of the rotation? So make these beds or sections in your plot or your garden. So let's say bed 1, which is, well, let's say it was a 20 by 20 plot or a 10 by 10 plot. You had tomatoes, another 10 by 10. Next to it had cucumbers. Then you had lettuce and your cauliflower and your peas and you had carrots. So if this was year 1, I would just simply take something from year 1 from the bed 6 and just move it one step up and move it to the first plot. And the first plot moves to the right. Tomato moves right, cucumber moves right. That is, so if you keep doing that, now you can see the peas came from here 6 to the beginning, carrots were here, they moved in, tomato were here, moved in. So if you have something like this for your garden planned out, this will be year 1. Next year, your carrot will go here, your tomatoes will go here. This is year 2, year 3, and then year 4. And so this actually helps you to build a longer duration of crop rotation. This will be a 6-year rotation, because by the time your tomatoes start here in this bed, and year 2 here, year 3 here, year 4 here, year 5, year 6, and year 7 is they're going to come back to that plot again. So that's an easy way. Again, something easy to maintain on the paper or write it in the computer in an Excel file, bed 1, bed 2, bed 3, and these crops, and just keep moving them like that. So anybody can, whoever takes over that garden later on, knows what was where and can follow the crop rotation. And crop rotation is absolutely critical because it not only helps with disease management, it also helps with the proper utilization of nutrients in the soil. It helps add organic matter in different ways and forms. Absolutely critical for vegetable production to keep the diseases at bay. So with that, I'm at the end here. I'd like to thank a lot of these funding agencies who have helped me in the past and even now currently on my research and extension projects. So thanks to everyone. And if you want to follow my lab, you can go to www.extension.iastate.edu/vegetable lab. Thank you.